Aisha stepped onto the jet bridge with her mother, and her tiny daughter pressed close against her chest. The warm morning sun followed them through the glass windows of the airport terminal, making each moment feel bright with possibility. Aisha carried a small tote bag that held diapers, a few baby toys, a copy of Nia's birth certificate tucked safely in an envelope. She had practiced this journey as carefully as she planned, Nia's first smile, every item double-checked, every detail accounted for. Today, she would introduce her baby girl to relatives she had not seen in years. For Aisha, this trip was more than just a flight. It was the start of a new chapter in her life. Her mother, Fatima, walked beside her, gently guiding Nia's stroller with one hand while offering comforting words to calm Aisha's nerves. Though Aisha was used to traveling, bringing a 3-month-old across the country felt daunting. She glanced down at Nia, who lay curled in a soft blanket, her tiny fists moving as if she were reaching for the clouds. Aisha smiled, smoothing back a lock of her own hair. "We'll be fine," she whispered. "Just breathe." When they reached the entrance to the plane, the flight attendant at the door offered a bright greeting. He wore a crisp uniform, his name badge gleaming in polished silver. "Good morning, ladies," he said, his voice smooth and practiced. "Welcome aboard Flight 542. He glanced politely at Aisha's boarding pass. "May I see your ID and boarding pass, please?" Aisha handed over her driver's license and her boarding pass, along with the envelope that held Nia's birth certificate. The attendant scanned her pass carefully. Then his eyes moved to the envelope. He frowned slightly. "And this?" he asked, lifting the envelope. "Why do you have the baby's birth certificate?" Aisha felt a small knot of worry form in her stomach. She answered softly, "It's just in case. I know some airlines ask for proof when traveling with infants." She hoped her tone sounded confident. He nodded slowly, but his expression remained tense. He flipped through the documents, studying each sheet as though searching for a hidden message. Airline policy requires confirmation of guardianship for infants, just to ensure safety rules. He tapped the certificate. "I'll need 2. Keep this until we land." Aisha's heart pounded. Her mother stepped forward, voice gentle but firm. "Is that necessary?" She is her mother. Fatima's tone carried years of quiet strength. Yet the attendant's eyes flickered with something unreadable. He tucked the papers under his arm. "Yes, ma'am. It's policy. You can get them back when you disembark." He offered a vague smile before directing them down the aisle. Aisha felt an unexpected sting behind her eyes. She clutched Nia closer and walked past the other passengers, who sat watching with polite curiosity. A few travelers smiled at the baby. Others pretended not to notice. Aisha's cheeks warmed. She fought to steady her breathing, telling herself that everything would be all right. After all, she had all her documents, and the attendant had only asked to hold them temporarily. They reached their seats in the middle of the cabin. Aisha guided the stroller through the narrow aisle, gently settling it beside her mother's chair. Nia's tiny face peeked out, her wide eyes blinking at the bright cabin lights. Aisha reached for the overhead bin to store her tote bag, and for a moment, she felt the normal excitement of travel return. She looked around. Rows of seats lined the fuselage. Overhead compartments glowed with small indicator lights, and a flight attendant in the aisle made final preparations before takeoff. Aisha buckled her seatbelt, her mother repeating the gesture beside her. She unfastened Nia from her carrier and carefully placed her in her arms. The baby yawned, her little mouth opening wide as if she were greeting some secret world. Aisha felt her heart swell. She pulled the blanket higher, tucking Nia's feet inside. Then she whispered a lullaby, soft and sweet, just loud enough for Nia's ears. The cabin noises faded as she focused on her daughter. The soft hum of the engines warming up, the distant chime of seatbelt signs, and the gentle murmur. A passenger settling in, her mother handed her a small pacifier, and Nia's tiny hand reached out to grasp it. Aisha watched with relief as her daughter calmed, leaning her head against her mother's shoulder. Yes, everything seemed to settle into place. And Aisha let out a long breath she didn't realize she was holding. But just as the engines roared too, Life for takeoff. The flight attendant who had checked their documents reappeared at their row. He stood over them, arms crossed. "Ma'am," he said to Aisha, "I need to see those papers again. Birth certificate ID, please." Aisha paused. Startled, around her, the cabin had turned quiet. Passengers in the nearby rows exchanged glances. The baby's soft breathing was the only sound in that moment, and Aisha's heart thudded loudly in her chest. "Yes, of course," she said, lifting the envelope from her tote. She handed it over, her fingers trembling. The attendant took the papers but did not look at them immediately. Instead, he lingered there, scanning Aisha's face with an expression that felt more intrusive than any security check should. The overhead lights reflected off his badge, emphasizing the distance. Growing between them, Aisha swallowed hard. Her mother leaned forward. "Is there a problem?" she asked, voice calm but edged with concern. He cleared his throat. "Just have to confirm that you're actually the mother. It's for the child's safety." Tone was flat, official. Aisha's chest tightened. She fought the flush of shame rising in her cheeks. She thought of how many times she had shown her driver's license for routine ID checks, of how often people had smiled at her baby without question. But on this plane, a simple act of proving motherhood had become a test. She took a breath. "I understand," she said softly. "But I assure you, I am her mother." The attendant dipped his head and finally glanced at the documents. He frowned again as he read through them, as though each word contradicted what he saw before him. He handed them back without apology. "Everything's in order," he said, voice curt, and walked away. As he walked down the aisle, Aisha sat back and closed her eyes for a moment. Her mother reached out and squeezed her hand. Aisha looked at Nia, whose eyelids fluttered as she shifted in her arms. Fatima offered a small smile. "Let's settle in," she whispered. "We're going to be just fine." A wave of relief passed through Aisha, but it was mixed with lingering embarrassment and anger. She scanned the cabin. Some passengers stared, others avoided her gaze. A few wore sympathetic looks, their eyes soft with understanding. Aisha straightened her back and offered a small, gracious nod to those who met her eyes. She refused to let this moment define her journey. The plane's engines gained power, the vibration humming through the seats. Aisha adjusted Nia in her lap, finding a comfortable position for breastfeeding. She draped a nursing cover over her shoulder and latched the baby on. Nia's tiny mouth found its nourishment, and Aisha felt a wave of peace as she fed her daughter. The steady rhythm of nursing soothed both of them, and Aisha could almost forget the earlier tension. In the aisle, other flight attendants moved, with practiced efficiency, distributing water and snacks to passengers. Aisha watched them, wondering if any truly understood the weight of what had just happened. She resolved that, if asked again, she would hold her head high and speak up firmly. No one should question her love or her right to care for her own child. Outside the small oval window beside her seat, the airport tarmac stretched out, dotted with luggage carts and ground vehicles. The sky was a bright, clear blue, as if nothing could cast a shadow on the morning. Aisha held Nia close and breathed in the soft baby scent of powder and warmth. She thought of the family waiting for them, the hugs and shared laughter that lay ahead. As the wheels lifted and the plane began its climb into the air, Aisha leaned back into her seat. She glanced at her mother, who sat quietly now, hands folded gently on her lap. Aisha offered a small, grateful smile. "Thank you," she mouthed. Fatima returned the smile. Atina felt the journey transform. What had begun with a moment of doubt had turned into a promise of strength. She stroked Nia's tiny head and whispered, "You and I, baby, we're going to show them what love looks like." Outside, the world grew smaller below, and Aisha held her daughter close, ready for whatever lay ahead. Aisha felt her heart still pounding when the flight attendant returned. She had just settled into a calm rhythm of feeding Nia, her daughter's gentle suckling, a steady reminder of why she had made this journey. The cabin lights hummed softly overhead, and the distant roar of the engines had grown steady now that they were climbing above the clouds. Yet in Aisha's mind, nothing had settled. The attendant paused beside them, folding his arms as if bracing for a long conversation. His polished shoes clicked on the aisle floor. Aisha lifted her head and met his eyes. He gave her no greeting, no softening of tone. "Ma'am," he said, voice low, "I need to confirm once more that you are the baby's mother. Please show me your ID and the birth certificate." A wave of cold washed over Aisha. She tightened her grip on Nia, almost forgetting the quiet pleasure of holding her child. She recalled the documents she had handed over earlier, which were now tucked away neatly in her tote bag by her feet. She reached down, her fingers brushing against the envelope, and pulled it out. She unfolded the certificate and held it up for him. "Here it is," she said, voice as calm as she could make it. He accepted the papers but did not examine them right away. Instead, he looked at Aisha's face. His eyes narrowed. He glanced at her daughter. "I'm sorry," he said, "but policy is policy. We have to be sure." His words felt sharp in the quiet cabin. Aisha's mother, Fatima, watched the scene unfold with concern etched clearly on her face. She rose in her seat, leaning forward. "She is her mother, sir," she said, tone gentle but firm. "You saw the documents? Why must you insist?" The attendant raised a thin hand, halting Fatima before she could speak further. He flipped open the certificate, scanning the printed lines as though they held some secret code. The baby in Aisha's arms opened her eyes and looked around as if sensing something was wrong. She let out a small whimper. Aisha shushed her, pressing a soft finger to the baby's lips. "It's okay, sweetheart," she whispered. "Everything is okay." A hush had fallen over the nearby rows. Passengers turned to look, curious but uncertain. Some leaned forward in their seats, trying to see what was happening. The quiet hum of small voices rose in a low, worried murmur. A man rose back, straightened in his seat, and a young woman glanced anxiously at the attendant, her eyes full of concern. The attendant flipped through the birth certificate once more. He peered at the date of birth, the doctor's signature, the hospital stamp. Then he handed it back without a word. "Everything checks out," he said flatly. Then he put the papers into the breast pocket of his uniform jacket. "You can carry on," he said, turning away. Aisha closed her eyes for a moment, relief. And anger mingling in her chest, she felt a hot flush on her cheeks. She offered a small, tired smile to her mother, who squeezed her hand. "Thank you," Aisha mouthed to her. Fatima nodded back, her face calm as ever. Aisha settled Nia back on her chest and looked around the cabin. Several passengers met her gaze and smiled supportively. A few others quickly turned their heads, away, uncomfortable or uncertain how to react. She sensed a shift in the air, as if everyone had suddenly become more aware of each other's humanity. She wrapped her arms around her daughter and closed her eyes, trying to savor the tender moment. But the tension lingered. Aisha wondered why the attendant had felt the need to humiliate her in front of everyone. Why did he doubt her love and her right to care for her own child? She thought of all the mornings she had woken up at dawn to prepare for this trip. She had smiled and waved goodbye to her husband at the door, telling him she would call when they landed. She had packed carefully, counted diapers and blankets, prepared burp cloths and pacifiers, and yet in this moment, her competence and her love had been questioned. A soft voice interrupted her thoughts. "Excuse me, ma'am," said a passenger seated directly across the aisle. A middle-aged woman with kind eyes and silver hair leaned forward. "Are you all right?" she asked softly. "I'm so sorry you had to go through that." Aisha looked up surprised and grateful. "Thank you," she said. "I'm fine now." The woman nodded. "It's not right," she said. "You shouldn't have to prove that your daughter is yours." Aisha gave the woman a small, warm smile. "I know," she replied, "but she's all I've got right now." She paused, tears welling in her eyes. "I just want to keep her safe, you know." The woman leaned back, folding her hands in her lap. "I understand," she said. "And I hope the rest of the flight is peaceful for you." Aisha exhaled slowly and looked at her mother, who offered an encouraging nod. She felt strengthened by the small kindness. She straightened her posture, resting her head gently against the headrest. She positioned Nia to feed again, using the nursing cover to make everything feel private once more. As Nia latched on, Aisha felt a wash of comfort. The simple act of feeding her daughter felt like a quiet act of resistance against the earlier doubt. Meanwhile, in the aisle, the attendant spoke quietly with a colleague. Aisha could not hear their words, but she sensed that their demeanor was different, more subdued. Perhaps someone had pointed out to them that what they had done was wrong. Perhaps they realized that a mother's love should never be questioned. In public, Aisha did not know, and she did not care to find out. She only cared about keeping her daughter safe and calm. Outside the window, the sky was a pale blue, flecked with wisps of white cloud. The sun glinted off the distant horizon, and the plane glided smoothly above the world. Aisha looked out for a moment, marveling at how small the world looked from this height. She thought of her relatives waiting below, her sister, her aunt, her cousins. She thought of the laughter and the hugs and the family stories they would share. She reminded herself why she had traveled. She had made this journey for love, for connection, for hope. Inside the cabin, the buzz of conversation began to rise. Passengers returned to reading or to browsing their phones. A child, too. Rose back began to giggle at a cartoon on the seat back screen. A man in a suit tapped his foot, listening to music through earbuds. Aisha closed her eyes for a moment, focusing on the soft rhythm of Nia feeding. She felt the baby's small fist press against her heart, and she allowed herself to relax. Mother caught her eye and offered a gentle smile. Fatima patted her knee, affording her a moment of comfort. Aisha returned the gesture, laying her hand over her mother's. They did not need to speak. They shared an unspoken bond of love and protection. Aisha felt a surge of gratitude that she was not alone. In this, even on a crowded airplane, she had support. Soon, the flight attendant returned once more with water and a few snack bags. He gave Aisha a curt nod before moving on. Aisha noticed that he no longer seemed hostile. If anything, he seemed distant and almost embarrassed. Instead, she took a sip of water and offered her daughter a gentle pat on the back, positioning her to burp. Nia made a small sound of contentment and then eased herself free, blinking up at her mother in a sleepy way. Aisha smiled and brushed a stray lock of hair from Nia's forehead. "You're doing great," she whispered. "I'm so proud of you." She felt the warmth of her daughter's skin against her own and thought of the journey ahead, landing, reuniting with family, finding strength and love. The plane leveled off at cruising altitude. The seatbelt sign dimmed, and attendants moved up and down the aisle, offering pillows or blankets to anyone who asked. A hush settled over the cabin, a peaceful quiet that felt healing after the earlier tension. Aisha leaned back and allowed herself a moment of rest. She closed her eyes, and the gentle rise and fall of the plane seemed to lull her toward sleep. Nia's soft breathing matched the rhythm of the engines, and Aisha felt a rare, delicate peace. Before she drifted off, she thought of how she would share this story later with her husband, with her friends, maybe even on social media. She knew that sharing would help others understand what it felt like to face doubt where love should live. But in this silent moment, high above the clouds, she chose to let the memory fade. Instead, she focused on the warmth of her daughter. In her arms, the steady presence of her mother at her side, and the soft hum of the airplane carrying them forward. They were safe, they were together, and that was all that mattered right now. Sarah sat 3 rows behind Aisha, her eyes drawn to the small family in the middle of the cabin. She had been half watching a movie on the seat back screen. But when she saw the flight attendant leaning over the mother and child again, her curiosity turned to concern. The attendant's tone had been firm, almost cold, and Aisha's shoulders had tensed with each question. "Ah!" Sarah shifted in her seat, uncomfortable with how the woman's face had flushed and how her baby had begun to fuss again.
Something did
not feel right. Sarah was not one to get involved in strangers' business, but this felt different. She felt a tug at her heart, not just for the mother and child, but for every person who had ever been made to feel unwelcome, judged, or disbelieved. She looked around quickly. Other passengers watched in silence, glancing back at their screens or gazing out the window as if to pretend nothing was wrong. But Sarah could not turn away. She fumbled in her pocket for her phone, her fingers shaking. Slightly, she tapped the camera app open and quietly aimed it down the aisle. She did not want to draw attention, so she held the phone low, angling the lens toward Aisha's row. Her heart pounded as she watched the attendant demand proof one more time. Aisha's mother had risen to defend her daughter, and Aisha herself clutched the baby protectively. Sarah's hand hovered near the record button. She took a silent breath. A faint click announced that the video was rolling. Sarah's breath caught. She hoped the recording would capture enough to show what had really happened. The screen glowed in her hand, showing the attendant's polished uniform and the trembling envelope of documents in Aisha's hands. The corner of the frame, she could see the baby's small face, eyes wide with worry. Sarah felt tears prick at the backs of her eyes as she filmed. She noticed the attendant suddenly stiffen. He turned his head toward Sarah's direction, and for a moment their eyes met through the lens. Sarah froze. She felt a surge of panic. Would he retaliate? Would he harass Aisha even more? She pressed her finger against the record button, focusing on steadying her breathing. She could not let him intimidate her. The attendant straightened his posture and closed the small distance between himself and Sarah's seat. "Ma'am," he said quietly but firmly, "would you please stop recording? Oh, this is private customer service." His voice was low, meant only for her, but enough to draw a flicker of attention from nearby passengers. Sarah's heart thundered. She glanced at Aisha, who looked from the attendant to Sarah, confusion and hope in her eyes. She wondered if this brave stranger behind her was the one recording. Sarah swallowed and kept her voice calm. "I'm sorry," she said softly, lowering her phone slightly. "But I only want to make sure she's treated fairly." The attendant's mouth tightened. He looked at Aisha, then at Sarah, then back at the documents in Aisha's hand. He seemed to weigh his options for a moment, hesitation flickering in his eyes. Other passengers started to lean forward, curious now about what had drawn the attendant's attention. A hush crept through the aisle. Aisha's mother rose in her seat again, but Aisha put a gentle hand on her arm. "It's okay," she mouthed. "Let it be." Aisha pressed a finger to her lips, shushing her mother and reminding her that they should not cause more trouble. She turned her head toward Sarah and tried to smile. Though her cheeks were wet with tears, Sarah nodded at Aisha, then looked back at the attendant. "I won't record you if you're willing to let her be," she said quietly. "Can you do that?" The attendant stared at her for a long moment. In that moment, the cabin lights and the soft hum of engines felt distant, as if everyone in the plane held their breath. Then he straightened his shoulders and looked away. "No more questions," he said to Aisha without looking at her. "Enjoy your flight." He walked back to the galley, leaving behind a silence broken only by the soft whimper of the baby. Sarah lowered the phone and tapped off the recording. She looked at Aisha's gentle face, the baby now drifting back to sleep in her arms, and felt a wave of relief. She had done something small, but maybe it had helped. Aisha wrapped her arms tighter around Nia and whispered, "Thank you." Her voice was thick with emotion. Sarah offered a warm smile, then returned to her own seat. She tucked the phone away, glancing at the small red dot that confirmed the video had been saved. She hoped it would serve as proof if the family needed it. Around them, passengers shifted back into their own worlds. Some drifted off to sleep. Others picked up magazines or stared out the window at the endless blue sky. But for Aisha, that moment remained vivid and alive. She felt the kindness of a stranger like Sarah and the power that came from speaking up, even in a quiet voice. Fatima leaned over to her daughter, brushing a loose strand of hair from Nia's forehead. "You were brave," she whispered to Aisha, "and so was your friend." She nodded toward Sarah, who pretended to read the safety card in her seat pouch, but watched Aisha with caring eyes. Aisha felt a warmth spread through her chest. She pressed a kiss to Nia's head and looked for Sarah's eyes. They met briefly, and Sarah gave a small respectful nod before looking away. Aisha realized that she would never know this woman's name. They were two strangers linked by a shared moment of compassion. The rest of the flight passed more peacefully. Aisha fed Nia, burped her, and finally settled her in the stroller again. She took care to keep the baby calm, whispering lullabies under her breath. Sarah watched once more from her seat, and each time their eyes met, Aisha offered a grateful smile. It was a silent conversation of thanks. Later, when the flight attendant made his usual announcements about the landing procedure, Aisha felt a quiet sense of victory. He did not return to question her again. He spoke to the cabin politely, but without the sharpness that had marked his earlier behavior. Aisha knew the recording had made him think twice as the plane began its descent. The soft hum of the engines changed, and the seatbelt sign lit up again. Aisha's heart fluttered. She gathered her documents into her tote bag, careful to keep Nia close. Fatima leaned in and whispered, "We'll get through this." Aisha nodded and took a deep breath. She felt stronger now, bolstered by the support of Sarah and the silent solidarity of the passengers around her, was ready for whatever came next, knowing that, on this flight, she was not alone. When the wheels touched down at their destination, a warm cheer rose inside the cabin, the sound of relief and excitement as the journey reached its end. Aisha unbuckled her seatbelt, lifted Nia out of her arms, and looked forward to seeing her family in the arrival hall. She clutched Sarah's recording in her mind as proof that one person's small act of courage could make a real difference. She gathered her things, she caught sight of Sarah gathering her own. Their eyes met one last time. Sarah offered a gentle smile and mouthed, "Good luck." Aisha pressed a hand to her heart and whispered back, "Thank you," and she turned away, stepping toward the future she had dreamed of, stronger, braver, and surrounded by the unseen kindness of strangers. A hush settled over the cabin after the flight attendant retreated to the galley. Aisha held Nia close, feeling the soft rise and fall of her daughter's tiny chest. Every passenger seemed caught in the same quiet moment, as though they all knew something important had just happened. A few people turned back to check their screens or adjust their blankets, but most sat still, eyes thoughtful. Aisha leaned against her mother Fatima and sighed. She felt both relief and a lingering shake of nerves. The baby cooed softly, and that small sound felt like a gentle promise of better things to come. Not long after, the captain's voice came through the intercom, calm and measured. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began. His voice carried the authority of someone used to leading, yet there was a note of warmth that reached every corner of the cabin. "This is Captain Reynolds. I'd like to address a matter before we continue our flight." A hush fell once more. Aisha gripped the armrest, uncertain what he would say. "When we welcome families aboard, we want everyone to feel safe, respected, and cared for," the captain said. Aisha glanced at Fatima, whose eyes shone with pride. "I understand that one of our passengers and her child were asked for additional proof of their relationship. I apologize for any distress this caused. Our airline's goal is to serve all customers with fairness and kindness." His words felt genuine, filled with the steady confidence of someone who knew mistakes happened, but wanted to make them right. As the captain continued, he explained that the airline would review its policies on infant travel and staff training. He spoke of the importance of trust between crew and passengers, and of the need to treat every family with respect. Aisha felt tears well up again, but these were tears of gratitude rather than hurt. Sarah, sitting 3 rows back, watched with quiet pride. She saw a few tears on Aisha's cheeks and offered a small, encouraging smile. The flight attendant who had questioned Aisha appeared in the aisle, looking more subdued than before. His shoulders were slightly hunched, and he avoided direct eye contact. He paused to let passengers pass, then moved toward the back of the plane where other crew members were stationed. Aisha's heart softened. This man had made a mistake, and now he seemed to understand its weight. She hoped he would learn from this and treat other families with care. Fatima wrapped an arm around Aisha and whispered, "You did well." Aisha nodded, her voice catching in her throat. She looked down at Nia, who yawned and stretched her arms. The baby's innocence, her simple trust in her mother, felt like the purest form of courage. Aisha kissed the top of Nia's head. "You're my little hero," she murmured. The sound of her own voice felt strong and sure. Sarah stood and leaned down. "Here," she said softly, holding out her phone. Aisha's eyes widened in surprise.
"Ah."
Sarah handed her the device, and Aisha played the video. The screen showed the attendant's rigid stance, the worried crease on Aisha's forehead. the trembling documents, and the brave moment when Sarah stepped in. Aisha watched herself press her lips together, trying to stay calm for her daughter. When the scene ended, Aisha turned off the screen with a gentle tap. "Thank you," Aisha said, her voice steady but soft. "I don't know what I would have done without this." Sarah shook her head. "You did everything right. I just wanted your story to be seen." The two women exchanged a look of shared understanding. It was a look that needed no words, a bond formed in a moment of need, sealed by kindness. Around them, passengers shifted and whispered. Some spoke of how they had felt uncomfortable when they saw the questions, how they had wanted to help, but did not know how. A man near the window leaned over and gave a polite nod to Aisha. A child 2 rows ahead waved a small hand. The simple gestures filled Aisha's heart. She realized how small acts by strangers could shine like beacons in dark times. The flight attendant brought water and snack packs to Aisha and Fatima, his tone now gentle as he said, "I hope you both are comfortable now." Aisha accepted a bottle of water and smiled. "Thank you," she said. His nod was quick, almost as if he worried he had no right to be there. Aisha thought of forgiving him not because he had apologized, but because forgiving felt stronger than anger. She offered him a quiet, sincere smile before he turned back to his tasks. As the plane cruised on, Aisha settled back into her seat. The seatbelt sign was off, and passengers began to move about. Some stretched in the aisle. Others reached for magazines or tablets. A few families sat together, laughing softly as children played games. The cabin felt lighter, less tense. Aisha's chest felt open, free of the tightness that had weighed on her. Fatima reached into her purse and pulled out a small notebook. She handed it to Aisha, who opened it to find a note in her mother's neat handwriting. "Love is stronger than doubt." Aisha pressed the note to her heart and felt a warmth spread through her. She looked at her daughter, now asleep, her tiny body curled against her mother's chest. A wave of fierce love washed over Aisha, stronger than any hurt she had felt before. The captain's voice came on again, softly announcing that the flight service would begin shortly. Aisha closed her notebook and tucked it away. She glanced at Sarah one last time. Sarah smiled and returned to her seat. Aisha leaned back, ready to rest. She felt safe in the knowledge that she had allies and strangers, and that her story mattered. Outside, the sky stretched endlessly, a canvas of soft blue and white. Somewhere below, towns and fields passed under flying wings. Aisha imagined her, relatives waiting at the airport, her husband pacing the arrival hall until he saw her smile. She pictured their embrace, Nia's cheeks pressed against their faces, and their laughter echoing in the day. That thought filled Aisha with gentle strength. When the flight attendant came by with the menu, Aisha politely declined, explaining that she and Nia would rest. He offered a kind nod and tucked the menu back into his pocket. Aisha closed her eyes, letting the lull of the engines carry her into a restful sleep. She held her daughter softly, and for the first time in hours, felt completely at peace. Above the clouds, the plane traveled onward, carrying Aisha, her mother, her daughter, and the memory of kindness that Sarah had shown. In that shared moment, they had found more than solidarity, they had found hope. And for Aisha, that hope would light the way through whatever lay ahead. They felt the wheels kiss the runway, and the plane's gentle vibrations slow. Aisha held Nia close, feeling her daughter's tiny heartbeats settle as they touched down. Around them, passengers whispered with relief and excitement. Some clapped. Softly, Aisha and Fatima unbuckled their seatbelts. Aisha gathered her tote bag and carefully lifted Nia from her lap. The baby nestled against her shoulder, its eyes blinking sleepily. They moved down the aisle toward the exit, and Aisha saw Sarah rise from her seat. She offered another warm smile and a small wave. Aisha nodded gratefully. A brief moment, no. Words were needed. It shared something real and important. Aisha felt a deep calm in her chest as she stepped onto the jet bridge and into the bright terminal. At baggage claim, they waited among travelers, pulling suitcases and checking phones. Aisha's heart thudded with mixed emotion. She had been through so much on this flight, yet she felt stronger now. She had stood up for herself and her child. She had seen the power of one person's courage. She thought of Sarah and the other passengers who had watched with caring eyes. Their silent support had made her feel less alone. Her thoughts turned to the airline's customer service desk at the far side of the carousel. Gave her a gentle nudge. "Let's go," she said. Aisha took a breath and pushed her cart forward. They approached the empty desk, where a young agent looked up and offered a friendly greeting. "Welcome," the agent said. "I hope you had a good flight." Aisha's throat tightened. She lifted Nia so the baby's face could rest against her shoulder. "I need to file a complaint," she said softly. She told the agent about the flight attendant who had asked for proof and had made her feel humiliated. She explained how Sarah had helped by recording the incident. She reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone. The agent watched the video with a solemn expression. "I'm so sorry this happened," the agent said. "Thank you for sharing your story. We will investigate and take action." Aisha felt a knot in her stomach loosen. The agent asked for her contact details and promised to follow up with her by email. Aisha left the desk feeling lighter. At least her voice had been heard. They stepped into the bright sunlight of the arrival hall. A sea of faces moved around them, some holding balloons or signs for arriving loved ones. Then Aisha saw her husband, Mumtaz, across the way. He stood holding a sign with her name printed in bold letters. His face shone with relief and joy. Aisha hurried toward him, and he swept her and Nia into a gentle embrace. Nia let out a small coo, and Mumtaz laughed softly. "Oh, my sweet girl," he said, kissing Nia's forehead. He looked at Aisha with care. "Are you okay?" She nodded and hugged him. "I'm fine," she whispered. "We're fine." They walked together to the parking area, Fatima following close behind, smiling at her daughter and granddaughter. That evening, in the warmth of their home, Aisha thought more about the flight. She opened her laptop and found a social media page for the airline. She drafted a post describing her experience. She wrote in simple words about how a mother should never be forced to prove her love. She attached the video from Sarah. Before she posted, she paused, then clicked share. Almost immediately, friends began to like and comment. Some shared their own stories of unfair treatment. Others thanked her for speaking up. Within hours, the story began to spread beyond her circle. A local news station picked it up, and an online petition to require bias training for airline staff gained thousands of signatures. Aisha watched the numbers climb. She felt humbled and proud. What had started as a private hurt now had a wider purpose, to help others and to shape change. The next day, the airline issued a public apology statement. They promised to review their policies and to train all crew members on fairness and respect. They said they would reach out to Aisha personally. Aisha saw the statement online and felt a sense of relief mixed with hope. She knew that words alone would not change hearts, yet she saw that her small act of speaking out had sparked a larger conversation. A week later, she received an email from the airline's customer relations team. They thanked her for her feedback and invited her to meet with them. They offered her a voucher for future travel and an invitation to speak at a training session. Aisha paused over her coffee, thinking of how she could turn her story into something helpful. She wrote back, agreeing to share her experience. On the day of the training session, Aisha stood in a conference room filled with flight attendants, managers, and trainers. She clutched her notes in one hand and held Nia's favorite small toy in the other. The room was quiet as she began to speak. She told them, in simple words, about her flight about, the fear and the shame she felt when asked to prove her motherhood. She spoke of Sarah's courage and of the passengers who had watched in silence. She spoke of how a mother's love is. Beyond question, the room remained still as she spoke. Some crew members nodded their heads, their eyes soft with understanding. A manager raised his hand to ask a question about how to handle similar situations. Others took notes. When she finished, there was a moment of silence. Then applause filled the room. Aisha felt tears prick her eyes, but they were gentle ones. She saw real change in their faces, a willingness to learn and to do better. After the session, a young flight attendant approached her with a shaky voice. "Thank you for sharing your story," she said. "I never realized how it would feel." Aisha smiled and patted her arm. "We all learn," she said. "That's how we grow." She felt warmth at her words, like sunshine on her skin. That night, as she tucked Nia into her crib, Aisha reflected on the journey. She thought of the moment when the attendant asked for proof, and how humiliation had nearly broken her spirit. She remembered Sarah's quiet bravery when she pressed record. She recalled the captain's apology and the passenger's silent support. She thought of the petition and the airline's promise to train their staff. Above all, she thought of love, how love could lead to fear, but also to courage and hope. She thought of her daughter's small hands and of all the mothers who would never have to prove that same love. She whispered a lullaby as she left the room and closed the door. Gently. The next morning, Aisha checked her phone and saw a new message. It was from Sarah. The message read, "I saw the news. Proud of you." Aisha's heart swelled. She typed back, "Thank you. Couldn't have done it without you." Even miles away, even after a single flight, they remained connected by that act of kindness. As the sun rose higher, Aisha sipped her tea and looked out the window at the clear sky. She felt a sense of peace mixed with strength. The journey had been hard, but it had changed things for the better. It had changed her. She thought of her daughter, growing every day, and of the world she would live in. A world where a mother's love need not be proven, where strangers could become allies, and where a single voice could spark real change. Aisha smiled and set her cup down. She picked up her phone and began to write again, but this time it was a letter to her daughter, to read when she grew older. She wrote about love and courage, about speaking up, and about kindness. She wrote about how her baby girl had taught her to be brave. When she finished, she read the letter through and tucked it into a small box of keepsakes. She closed the lid and placed it on the shelf above Nia's crib. Then she stood and watched. The small figure slept peacefully, her tiny chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm. Aisha whispered a final promise. "I will always protect you, my darling, and I will always believe in the power of love." Outside the window, the world stretched bright and wide. Inside, a mother held hope in her heart and knew that this story, born in a moment of doubt, had grown into something beautiful and strong.